Our message today is about one of my favorite guys in the Bible. I just love to talk about him, and his name is Joseph. And he's so wonderful. And he's the kind of person that makes the church family a very, very good place. Everybody liked Joseph. It was just amazing in the early church. Now, he lived in Cyprus, which is an island off of Turkey and in Greece. He had a little farm there, but he was a Levite. And the Levites did not have territory like the other 12 tribes of Israel, but their job was to come to the temple for a 1-month term. And in the temple, they were ushers, the one who handled the candles, the one who brought the sheep and the oxen to the altar. They did all the heavy lifting, while the priests would sort of stand back and not get their hands dirty, as the Levites did all the work. And he would work for a whole month as a volunteer. He weren't paid for this. And he just did a great job. And I think he had a chance to hear Jesus in the temple. And in the early church, he is part of that early church family. And he was amazing. He was so amazing that Peter, James, John, and Andrew were touched by him because he encouraged them. He encouraged everybody. And the word encourage is in the encourage. He'd bring courage to them. You know, the church was under some persecution. He was the guy that built you up. The guy who was glad to see you in church. And he was a big guy, the Bible says, really big. So, he has a wonderful ministry. And the apostles, they say, we're going to change your name. Now, we haven't done too much of that in this church family. We have not changed many names here. Many, you know. We're going to call you Bar, means son, Nabis, encouragement. You're the son of encouragement. We're changing your name to Barnabas. And he's great. He made a huge impact in that early church. Boy, the early church would not have been the same without him. And what I'm going to say is the early church, or any church, would not be the same without people like Barnabas. And the possibility is every one of us has the possibility of being a Barnabas. Every one of us could be that one that helps lift somebody else up, to see a greatness in another, to see the possibility in a kid. And you see possibilities they didn't see. Years ago, the president of St. Mary's Hospital was part of our church family, Jim McDowell, and he invited Betty and I to go to this big celebration that the nurses were putting on for scholarships. And I sat at the table with the president of Good Sam Hospital. And he had some encouragers, and I want to tell you that story. When he was a kid, his dad was custodian to a big Presbyterian church in North Carolina. North Carolina is packed with Presbyterian churches, and custodian, and the people saw him setting up chairs, taking down chairs, sweeping up, helping his dad. And when he was a senior, graduating, they said to him, this would be back in the 1960s, what are you going to do? I don't know. Are you going to go to college? I don't have any money. They said, these Presbyterian elders, and he's Catholic, his dad was Catholic, you're going to go to college. They sent him to college. That church got behind him and encouraged him and gave him a vision he didn't see himself. He became a hospital administrator in Vietnam for the soldiers. And he worked with his mission in Good Sam Hospital to care for the poor. And I said to him at that table, you know, no, he told me he liked Presbyterians because of that. But I told him, you want to send a letter to that congregation and tell them how, thanks to them, you're in mission today. And he'd love to hear how their giving made a difference. So somebody had vision in a young man. And it made all the difference in the world. Hospital, to many patients, and to him. So, Barnabas is a key. And in the early church, one of the gifts that some people have are financial gifts. And Dr. Underwood, my goodness, all the expansion in all the cities around us, millions of dollars have been raised, and now we have satellite centers like in Peoria, Trenton. Now they're working in Nashville to get a satellite center. I mean, it's a huge, but it takes money. That our church people have given rooms over there. There's the J Knight Auditorium over there, and there's scholarships. And I just loved it when Jane Pfeiffer made scholarships, and she could sit at the table with the kids receiving scholarships. That was so grand, I thought. How wonderful that she could see them before she died, and there's still scholarships with the priority going to your kids, because it's priority, or the Presbyterians of this church family, or the people of this church family going to college. That's the first priority. But that's encouraging. It's like opening a door for somebody to get some education. And so, what Joe did, Barnabas now, he had a farm, he sells it, and he gives it to the early church family. All the people of the way at that time, and they were caring for the poor, and they fed out of that money and other donations to those orphans. That's what the early deacons did. He helped fund it. So some people have the opportunity of giving. Now, remember, in the temple, the biggest giver, when people were putting hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars into the temple, one lady put in the two smallest coins. Says, that's the biggest giver. So we need to remember that as well. But it's nice to have the scholarships and to expand things at the hospital or at the church, or with special missions, or Camp Crew, or Camp Crew director. So that's a way of encouraging. Now comes a big key. We got a guy, his name is Saul, and he's named after the tallest king of Israel's history, a really big guy, King Saul, and this guy was persecuting the church family. And you didn't want to see him knocking on your door, because he would take you into jail. One deacon he had executed by stoning, and people were afraid of him, and he got some letters of authority from the priest to go up to Damascus and lock up the Christians there. Now, they weren't called Christians later until Antioch. They were called people of the way. And so he's going to do that, but he has a conversion experience on the way. Now he wants to come to church. He's knocking on the door, and they're saying, no way, we don't want you. Now this guy, his name is now changed to Paul, which means little one. This guy is going to write half of the New Testament. They don't want to admit, they don't know that. And who does it? Who could talk to the guy who's brave enough to do it? It was Barnabas. And Barnabas, in talking to him, is totally convinced, and because the church family loves him and the apostles appreciate him, he brings Paul to the apostles and says, this guy is legitimate. Accept it. Not too well. Stephen's family, church, they don't like it. And they're happy to send him on missionary journeys. Very happy to send him away, because there's a lot of painful memories with Paul as he persecuted the church. But see, Barnabas opened that door. And then in the early church, they had this idea that if you were to become Christian, you had to be Jewish first. Eyes had to be circumcised. You had to wear Jewish clothes. You couldn't eat shrimp or pork chops or hot dogs. It had to be kosher food. And Barnabas and Paul said, no, it's not the way. Let's not put that burden on them. But that's just incredible. And because of Barnabas' backing of Paul, such a ministry, and our adult Bible study that meets at 9:30 downstairs, they're reading out Paul's letters in the study. Paul's letters to the young pastors at that time. So he has a huge, huge gift. Now, also had the ability to stand up to somebody who got in trouble. John Mark, who writes later on the Gospel of Mark, was on a missionary journey with them. It got scary. And John Mark says, see you guys, see you Barnabas, goodbye Paul, I'm going back to Mom in Jerusalem. Scary for me. He leaves. Paul is outraged. Barnabas, it's his cousin. He understands. Hey, the next missionary trip, Barnabas and Paul, best buddies, are ready to go on that missionary trip. Mark says, take me, I'm ready to go. Paul says, make a mistake once, shame on you. Pull another stunt like that, if I took you, it would be shame on me. And the Bible said a sharp contention. I hope you haven't been in sharp contentions in family or friends. That's not a good thing. But it happens sometimes in churches and places. Sharp contention arises between Barnabas and Paul. And Paul forgot his best buddy out of his pride. And Barnabas says, I'm sticking with my cousin. Paul takes off with Silas. This is Barnabas, because Barnabas was big like a football linebacker. That protection, really. And Barnabas takes John Mark. Now, when a person is in trouble, who is willing to stand by him? Barnabas was. That's a huge gift. There was a church in town that a person that had been in jail came out and they were attending the church. And I talked to the pastor, are they being accepted? And she said, yes. I was so happy to hear it. That's the mark of a good church. So Eddie Dahlman, who does our puppet show at the early service, helped advertise and groundswell for drug court. And in drug court, you go 3 years. If you've been picked up for drugs, you don't have to go to jail, but you get random drug testing. And if you can stay clean those 3 years, the sentence is taken off, and you have the possibility of a new life. And that's like, let's have a helping hand up with responsibility. And Eddie was behind it. And you, our deacons, we're the only church supporting that. But it's kind of neat because it's a helping hand up. And that's what I like the story about Jesus. Like, can we be in love? Can we be in support? Can we be a Barnabas? Now, I'm retiring again in May. So I want to say, when I came to this church, I had 2 people who said, Pastor Ed, I want you to know I stood by every pastor. I'm standing by you. Myers, Walter Merkelbach. I'm suggesting to you, you might be that one who stands by the pastor. Whether it's the interim pastor that they have when the pulpit committee is searching for a pastor, or it might be the next pastor, because the next pastor will be different. I guarantee it. That pastor will have more hair. You'll say, that pastor has too much hair. When I came here, I had a mustache. The hair was long, brownish, and reddish. And every word I preached was behind that pulpit. I had every word written down for 10 years. And if somebody complains about that, but the next pastor does that, you better set that person straight, because complaining doesn't help. Pastor develops because of love and support, despite the mistakes they made. And thank God I had a country church my first 6.5 years. I remember I was preaching. I came out of Pittsburgh Seminary. Well, we have kids here. Let's have a coffee house like we had in Pittsburgh back in the 60s. The country kids wanted nothing of a coffee house. There was that. We want to play softball. You know, it was just different. I remember, strip mining for coal was a terrible thing. And I talked about it afterwards. An elder, and it was the son of the guy, says, my dad owns all these trucks that take the coal from the strip mines and moves it to the utilities and stuff. I'm like, oh. So I was wise enough to realize that was subject I wasn't going to go down. And the same thing happens to Baptists in Kentucky, where they make the whiskey. You don't hear them talking against whiskey when all the congregation's working there. So the pastor will make some things, and you got to help that pastor out. That's all there is to it. But if you're a Barnabas, you'll make it work. But if you begin to complain, the morale falls, and it's not very good. Now, pastor coming here will do very well, because you're a very, very loving congregation. I want to share something with you in closing. Great book, Philip Yancey, Vanishing Grace. It's in our library. And he interviews Christians around the world in hostile places. What does it take for a person to become a Christian in a hostile environment? I have interviewed, he says, some of the faithful in places like Russia, China, Kazakhstan, I can't pronounce that, Ukraine, Albania, Romania. Why did you take such a risk, I ask? Why did you choose to follow Jesus when your government, your teachers, and perhaps your own family insisted it was all a lie? Again and again, I heard a two-pronged answer. Okay, now there's two things when they became a Christian. Two-pronged. They speak of their spiritual thirst and inner longing that no amount of noisy propaganda could silence. They had an inner hunger. And then they tell me, and here's where you come in. They tell me of a humble Christian who loved them. That's the power you have. I talk to people in this church. I've seen people come out of really rotten, I shouldn't say rotten families, but dysfunctional families. How did you make it, I ask? You were here in this church family. How did you have such a great life? There was nothing at home, or it was negative at home. Well, this church family loved me and believed in me. Owen Kurth gave me candy, and the cultural society got behind me. There was a teacher that believed in me. Now she has a great family, unlike foster kids, just Kentucky, I think, or Tennessee. But I was so inspired. But you see, that's the power you have. It's not worth fighting. It's not worth staying in pride or anger. It's worth loving, and that's what it means to follow Jesus. I love to tell the story because it's about Jesus and his love. And when we sing this closing hymn, I like some of the old hymns because I remember standing next to Mom singing them while Dad was in the pulpit in Pennsylvania. Amen.